Agora sim, oficialmente, boa tarde, sejam bem-vindos novamente. Vamos dar início ao segundo painel, Consumidor do Futuro. Para isso, pedimos que ocupem os seus lugares, por gentileza, e vamos receber aqui o doutor Richard Lee Hochstetler, ele que é diretor de Assuntos Econômicos e Regulatórios do Instituto Ascende Brasil. Senhoras e senhores, com vocês, doutor Richard Lee.
Boa tarde. É muito prazer para a gente falar sobre o consumidor nesse segundo painel. O consumidor que nós planejamos, operamos, discutimos o setor elétrico o tempo todo, é para atender o consumidor, mas sempre o consumidor é um organismo meio à parte que faz a sua coisa lá e de lá sai uma curva de carga que aí o setor elétrico se vira para atender. Mas, em geral, o consumidor não está no centro de nossas discussões, não faz uma parte, não interage diretamente no mercado no dia a dia. Mas, olhando para frente, a gente vê um cenário muito diferente, em que o consumidor pode e deve desempenhar um papel de protagonista e ser um agente ativo, tomando decisões decisivas que vão direcionar os rumos e desenvolvimento do setor elétrico nos próximos anos. Isso deve a uma série de questões, confluências de efeitos ao mesmo tempo. Em parte, a liberalização, que pela primeira vez oferece oportunidades de decisões para os consumidores escolherem seus fornecedores. Tem mudanças tecnológicas que permitem aos consumidores atuarem como consumidores e ter uma reação para o lado da demanda. Tem tecnologias que permitem esse gerenciamento muito mais fácil e também tem o surgimento de novos prestadores de serviços que também facilitam esse tipo de mudança. E aí, com isso, nós temos um novo perfil de consumidor que vem surgindo, que nos próximos anos podem mudar substancialmente o nosso mercado. Consumidor que adapta novas tecnologias, um consumidor que é mais antenado, que não só age, mas também reage às condições do sistema e também que tem uma visão holística que não olha só a questão de preço, mas como suas decisões também impactam os impactos socioeconômicos de suas decisões. Toda essa mudança já vem de trás de algum tempo. A liberalização no Brasil começou mais de 20 anos atrás. Esses aqui são os dados da CCE, da Câmara de Comercialização de Energia Elétrica, os números de consumidores, de agentes no mercado. Ali embaixo você vê a base, são os consumidores livres, em azul. Na outra ponta você tem os produtores independentes, os geradores crescendo ao longo do tempo, em roxo os comercializadores também, e aí a partir de 2008 o surgimento ali dos consumidores especiais, que como os consumidores livres também podem escolher outro fornecedor, desde que comprando energia de fontes incentivadas. Isso tudo veio a partir da liberalização que começou com a Lei 9.074, em 95, primeiramente abrindo só para os consumidores com uma carga superior a 10 megawatts, 10 ou mais, em tensão de 69 kilovolts. 5 anos depois, isso foi relaxado, foi aberto também para consumidores com cargas a partir de 3.000 quilowatts, e assim por diante. Em 96 também se criou a figura do comercializador especial, do consumidor especial, que pode adquirir livremente energia desde que venha de fontes de pequenas hidrelétricas, termoelétricas a biomassa, eólica, solar e cogeração qualificada. E olhando para frente, a estratégia continua sendo essa, uma liberalização gradual e contínua e, em última instância, abrindo o mercado para todos os consumidores. Já teve este ano a consulta pública no Ministério, a consulta pública 77, que prevê nos próximos 2 anos essa contínua ampliação do mercado livre, potencialmente. E no Congresso tem 2 projetos de lei. No Senado, a 232 e na Câmara, 1917, que também, na mesma forma, prevê um escalonamento de abertura gradual, em última instância, abrindo para o consumidor de baixa tensão, que pode escolher o seu comercializador varejista. Na outra ponta, uma outra mudança regulatória que também vem mudando o cenário significativamente, iniciativa da ANEEL, com a Resolução 482, em 2012, foi a abertura, a instalação do regime de compensação de energia elétrica, em que consumidores podem instalar seus micro e mini geradores, e aí nos momentos em que sua produção supera seu consumo, ele pode compensar essa energia para um consumo em outro momento, em que sua produção é menor que seu consumo. Só isso foi suficiente para permitir viabilizar essa tecnologia, e isso vem crescendo exponencialmente nos últimos anos. Mas é especialmente na fronte de tecnológica que vem as maiores mudanças e que realmente tem um impacto muito grande de mudança no setor. Várias tecnologias estão se barateando e viabilizando em maior escala, mas a gente destaca especialmente a geração fotovoltaica, porque ela é especialmente adepta para a geração distribuída. Além de ser de fácil instalação e baixa dificuldade de manutenção, ela é perfeitamente modular, né? Pode ser de qualquer escala, então ele se modula muito facilmente para a geração distribuída. Telemedição e controle também é um fator muito relevante. Isso permite uma coordenação desses recursos distribuídos e reagir às condições do sistema, que era uma barreira no passado, que era muito mais difícil de coordenar isso quando você não tinha isso. E a internet das coisas permite esse tipo de coisa, inclusive avançando em equipamentos atrás do medidor, que não estão diretamente ligados na rede, mas através da internet você consegue ter uma coordenação centralizada. Veículos elétricos são mais um exemplo também onde o consumidor passa a sentar no assento do motorista. Essa é a piadinha do papai que minha filha falaria. Que também certamente afetará muito o mercado de energia nos próximos anos. E baterias que também viabilizam a suavização tanto do lado da demanda ou da oferta, a carga e a produção. Então, essas 5 dimensões criam uma série de oportunidades que vão alterar muito o mercado nos próximos anos. Hoje, se você vai para uma loja de eletrodomésticos, você já pode comprar uma máquina de lavar e secar roupa, que já vem com tecnologia embarcada, que permite você programar quando que você quer que a máquina funcione. Inclusive, você pode acionar remotamente pelo seu celular ou seu tablet em qualquer momento. Você casando isso com uma estrutura tarifária com postos horários, você tem uma possibilidade de gerenciamento de demanda muito fácil e simples. Uma outra possibilidade que vem surgindo com a geração nos centros nas unidades de consumo, tem a possibilidade dos consumidores instalarem uma capacidade maior do que o seu consumo próprio e aí vender isso para os seus vizinhos e outros consumidores na rede de distribuição. E isso abre um elo totalmente novo, uma oportunidade de comercialização peer-to-peer, de consumidor a consumidor, ou prosumidor a consumidor. E surge uma nova oportunidade de negócio, que são o surgimento de plataformas para viabilizar essa comercialização. Outra possibilidade os veículos elétricos, não só eles agregam uma carga totalmente nova para o setor elétrico, mas também tem um impacto de alterar significativamente o perfil de carga no sistema carros, em última instância, são baterias com rodas, então eles abrem a possibilidade também de servirem como um recurso para o sistema que poderia ser comprar e vender energia ao longo do tempo. Isso é uma coisa que pode parecer distante, mas já existem analistas falando que se hoje a gente fosse construir, estabelecer a infraestrutura de transporte rodoviário do zero hoje, só olhando questões econômicas, a alternativa mais barata seriam com veículos elétricos. E vai mais a fundo, isso aqui é da BNP Paribas. dizendo que veículos a combustão só seriam competitivos se o preço do petróleo fosse abaixo de $10 o barril. Então, assim, pode ser que isso não chegue imediatamente, mas em algum momento vai vir com muita força e vai ter uma transformação muito significativa no mercado. Todos esses recursos energéticos distribuídos, né, eles podem ter um potencial grande aí de ter um novo serviço de agregadores que pode, então, negociar condições de controle desses recursos e, agregadamente, então, operá-los como se fosse uma usina centralizada e vender energia no mercado atacadista. Isso tanto para geração distribuída, né, baterias, o gerenciamento da demanda, todos eles poderiam ser utilizados dessa forma. Então, mais uma fonte de flexibilidade que a gente falou tanto hoje de manhã, mas só pensando no lado da oferta, aqui a gente vê o lado da demanda, também pode contribuir significativamente para isso. E, finalmente, uma terceira dimensão é a prestação de serviços ancilares. Isso aqui é uma citação de um estudo, uma simulação que foi feita para um serviço de controle centralizado de uma série de estabelecimentos com ar-condicionado central, em que você poderia colocar margens de temperaturas aceitas pela temperatura, e esse gerenciamento seria feito escalonando, então, o acionamento e desacionamento desses ar-condicionados para prover serviços de regulação de frequência e voltagem na rede. Obviamente, só o fato de você escalonar, então, você ter diferentes consumidores ligados a cada momento, isso já ajuda a suavizar a rampa de elevação e queda da carga, mas ele pode ampliar isso para seguir a carga, mas para isso, obviamente, aí a banda tem que aumentar. Então, uma das formas de fazer isso é você, normalmente, espreme a banda de temperatura em que você liga e desliga os ar-condicionados, então você tem um ciclo mais rápido, desliga e desliga, para ter aquela margem de temperatura para fazer esses ajustes de serviço-sistema. Então, tem um custo para o consumidor, que é o desgaste maior da sua máquina, mas ele poderia ter uma remuneração aí para a prestação desse serviço. Tudo isso enche os nossos olhos de potencialidade, de ganhos de eficiência, de oportunidades de negócios, mas também dá um frio na barriga, né? São transformações muito grandes, e num setor como o elétrico, que a gente tem investimentos de longuíssimo prazo, temos uma regulação muito detalhada, que é complexa para ser modificada, tem também riscos grandes de ocasionar prejuízos, né, investimentos encalhados. Então, isso dá uma preocupação grande. Hoje de manhã, o James Ellis já falou de risco de ataque cardíaco. Ontem eu conversei com o Sr. Chancellor, ele também falou que a parte do meu trabalho é de falar com as pessoas, assustá-las do que vem por aí. Então, eu queria falar, a gente planejou muito bem esse evento, fizemos, ao mesmo tempo que ao nosso lado tem aqui a Sociedade de Cardiologia, então, qualquer problema, alguém levanta a mão, a gente chama um médico aí. Mas aí a gente pode identificar bem com essa charge aqui do gerente que chega ao seu subordinado, né? Eu quero que você encontre uma forma arrojada e inovadora de fazer tudo exatamente como a gente sempre fez nos últimos 25 anos. Especialmente para a distribuição, vai ser uma transformação muito grande, né? A gente, não só a rede vai ter que ser adaptada para lidar com esses fluxos em múltiplas direções, mas também o próprio modelo de negócios vai ter que ser reinventado. Além disso, o perfil do mercado vai mudar significativamente, com novos agentes entrando, né? Além dos comercializadores varejistas, podemos ter o surgimento de plataformas para essa comercialização peer-to-peer, podemos ter os serviços de agregadores, né, gerenciando esses recursos energéticos distribuídos, podemos ter aqueles serviços de gestão de ativos atrás do medidor, e, além disso, podemos ter grandes players entrando no mercado de outros setores, né? Se dá um frio na barriga para o setor elétrico, imagina para o petrolífero, que vê um potencial de perda de mercado muito grande com a eletrificação do transporte rodoviário. Então, pode ter um avanço grande dessas empresas petrolíferas entrando no setor elétrico. A Shell já colocou como meta de ser a maior companhia elétrica do mundo até 2030. E está agindo nessa direção. Ela comprou a Sunnen na Alemanha, comprou a First Utility na Inglaterra, também comprou ativos nos Estados Unidos. Então, é um movimento que já começa a acontecer e certamente vai mudar o perfil do mercado nos próximos anos. Mas a gente coloca isso, só a liberalização garante esse mundo melhor, assim, os consumidores vão fazer boas decisões. O mercado do Reino Unido foi um dos primeiros a liberalizar completamente o mercado, inclusive até o consumidor residencial de baixa tensão. E lá já tem alguns questionamentos com relação a isso. Houve uma pesquisa uns anos atrás, olhou a questão das escolhas dos consumidores, viram dada a oportunidade de escolhas, somente 20% realmente migraram para um comercializador que oferecia um preço menor para eles. E pior, dos que disseram que mudaram de comercializador procurando uma economia, 17% a 32% não conseguiu, acabou trocando para um outro comercializador que era mais caro do que o seu provedor anterior. Então, isso coloca algumas dúvidas aí, inclusive tem parlamentares britânicos que têm defendido já voltar a ter uma regulação tarifária, ou pelo menos um preço teto, ou uma margem de discriminação de preços que vem ampliando ao longo dos anos. Mas o que isso quer dizer? O consumidor não é confiável, a gente precisa ser paternalista, assim, é como essa criança na vitrine da loja de doces que não aguenta a tentação do pirulito na sua frente. Tem várias reflexões com relação a isso, a literatura trata bastante disso. De fato, tem um problema de inércia de consumidores. Para muitos consumidores, a energia elétrica é uma parcela muito pequena do seu orçamento, então não é uma coisa que os consumidores estão dispostos a gastar muito tempo para avaliar. Tem a questão de custo de transação. Quem lembra, alguns anos atrás, a dificuldade de migrar de um fornecedor de telefonia celular para outro, ou TV a cabo, ou internet, sabe a dor de cabeça que isso pode ser. Então, esses custos de transação não necessariamente são os reais, mas podem ser os percebidos da experiência passada. Tem uma dificuldade, uma discrepância, que os sinais de preço são de alta frequência, né? Os preços de energia elétrica podem variar muito dentro do mesmo dia, e o consumidor toma essas decisões olhando, né, a sua fatura mensal do mês passado. Então, ele olha os preços do mês passado e as quantidades vendidas, compradas no mês passado, para tomar suas decisões hoje. Então, isso pode levar a umas decisões também equivocadas. Além disso, tem a dificuldade que a energia é multidimensional, além do consumo, você tem a questão da potência máxima demandada, você tem a questão do perfil da carga horária, tudo isso tem impactos em termos de custo. Quando você põe uma tarifa, estrutura tarifária que capta todas essas dimensões, torna-se difícil comparar tarifas, né? Então, uma provedora que tem 3 parâmetros para comparar ou mais, isso torna mais difícil essa comparação. E, por fim, tem a questão da qualidade do fornecedor, né? Tem aquele dizer, se a oferta é boa demais para ser verdade, provavelmente é boa demais para ser verdade. Então, e aí isso acaba minando a questão da concorrência, porque se você fica, né, desconfiado que o preço mais baixo é por ser não confiável, aí a concorrência começa a falhar. Então, são questões importantes. Muitos desses têm soluções, a gente pode trabalhar, mas outros são mais difíceis. Mas são questões para serem refletidas quando a gente pensa na liberalização. Olhando para frente, o que precisa ser mudado? Essa aqui é uma lista inicial, provocativa, a lista podia ser muito maior, mas só algumas questões. A gente ainda precisa melhorar muito a estrutura tarifária, ainda existe algumas distorções que a estrutura tarifária acaba não refletindo custos adequadamente, então as decisões entre mercado livre e mercado regulado, ou a decisão de se tornar um consumidor, né, autoprodução versus abastecimento pela rede, acabam sendo distorcidas. Precisamos ter um aprimoramento do mercado com granularização maior, preços horários que estão para vir aí. Também, possivelmente, mais à frente, fazer isso com granularidade maior espacial. Precisamos melhorar o sistema de garantias para lidar com a inadimplência. Questão de pendências judiciais que estão aí há anos, liminares, que não permitem a liquidação do mercado. E temos que aumentar a frequência da liquidação. Questão de tributos e encargos. A energia elétrica é mais tributada do que a maioria dos produtos na economia brasileira. Isso vai ter que ser mudado aí nos próximos anos. E os encargos também são muito altos para custear os subsídios e descontos tarifários que tem por aí. Lá para frente, isso pode levar consumidores a abandonar a rede e para o suprimento próprio, não porque é mais eficiente, mas por causa desses outros fatores. Então, isso é uma coisa que vai ter que ser enfrentada nos próximos anos. Nossas perdas não técnicas e inadimplências são muito altas, então é extremamente importante de desenvolver procedimentos claros, de limitação das responsabilidades entre o comercializador e a distribuidora, de como lidar com isso, como remunerar esses serviços, os prazos para efetuar esses serviços. Também precisamos olhar a questão do fornecedor de última instância, o que acontece com um comercializador quebra, quem que vai atender isso, quem que lida com o consumidor que ninguém quer, que tem alto grau de inadimplência, pouca capacidade de pagamento. E contratos legados também, que é um problema muito sério no Brasil, dado que nós firmamos rotineiramente contratos de 20, 30 anos. Então, quando o consumidor migra, aquele contrato permanece lá e isso precisa ser trabalhado. Então, essas são as ideias aqui para iniciar nossas discussões de hoje à tarde. Muito obrigado.
Muito obrigado, Dr. Richard, nós agradecemos. Senhoras e senhores, convidamos para a primeira palestra do painel o professor Feridun Siochansi, ele que é presidente da Menlo Energy Economics, empresa que aconselha clientes nacionais e internacionais sobre estratégias para responder a rápida transformações dos negócios de energia elétrica. O senhor Siochansi é o editor do E-Energy Informer, um boletim mensal de circulação internacional. Trabalhou na Southern California Edison Company, SCE, Instituto de Pesquisa de Energia Elétrica, no NIRA, Global Energy Decisions. Desde 2006, ele editou 11 livros publicados pela Academic Press. Lembrando que depois nós teremos um momento de perguntas e respostas, por isso anotem nas fichas que estão dentro das pastas de vocês. Com vocês, professor Siochansi. Next.
This is the advance?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I have to apologize that I'm probably the only speaker who's going to speak in English and not in Portuguese. So I apologize for that. My American colleagues spoke fluent Portuguese and put me to shame. But, you know, I'm an old man, and as the saying goes, it's hard to teach an old dog a new trick, which is to learn how to speak Portuguese. So, but joking aside, everyone I have spoken to speaks perfect English, so hopefully this is not going to be a big problem. So the speakers asked me to talk a little bit about the future of consumers, which is something I've been thinking about in the last few years. So I organized my presentation sort of along these lines, but before I forget, I wanted to thank the organizers. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead. Richard and Claudia, who called me a while back out of complete surprise to ask me to come to this event. So very, very much appreciate the opportunity to be here. and look forward to the discussions and debate, because I come from a suburb of San Francisco, so close to Silicon Valley, where a lot of good ideas and sometimes crazy ideas come up. Some of them become big companies, some of them you never hear about. So I have a Silicon Valley-centric point of view. So a lot of what I'm going to say probably doesn't apply, maybe not today and maybe not even tomorrow, to say Brazil, but maybe it does. So with that, I organized my thoughts along just a few words about a little bit of background so you know where I'm coming from. Then I'm going to focus on 3 trends, all of which have been talked about already, so I'm not sure if I'm going to add anything that you haven't heard, especially coming after James, who gave an excellent presentation. I'm not sure I can really add much to the trends, but I'll try to put them into those 3 categories, and I think maybe that would be helpful, and then I'll give you a little bit of what this means. But before we go any further, as everyone knows, the world, from an electricity point of view, can be divided into 4 different, or maybe more, but certainly 4 different groups. And the World Bank characterizes them, as you see, the upper income, the middle, and the 2 sort of lower income. And I was looking at the numbers. You know, if you go at one extreme, there are countries that people have no money and use virtually no electricity, like 120 kilowatt hours a year on the bottom end of the scale. And then on the other side, there are countries that make tons of money. And I think Iceland, per capita consumption is something like 23,000 kilowatt hours a year. So you wonder what these people are melting steel in their background or garage, or what are they doing with that many kilowatt hours? That's like 2 times what Americans use. But anyway, so what happens in different parts of the world, whether you're talking distributed generation or these trends that James and others spoke about, to some extent depends on where you are. If you're in the lower income, you might in fact leapfrog because you don't have a network. Maybe you just jump to the microgen, which is locally produced, and I'll talk about that. So there's interesting opportunities just because of where you start, and I think that's something to think about. In the introduction, it was mentioned that I publish a newsletter. I'm not here to really advertise anything, but I do look at trends, and I publish a newsletter monthly, and if anyone's interested, let me know, and I'll send you a copy. In my spare time, since 2006, I've edited a number of books, and these are some of the titles. Most of them may not be appropriate for today. However, these 3 that came in the last few years, Distributed Generation, Future of Utilities, and Innovation at the Grid's Edge, I think might be somewhat relevant. And then this book just came out earlier this year. And for those of you who are not familiar, everyone has heard about consumer and prosumer, but there's a new word that you may or may not have heard about, and it's called prosumager. And I think the translators in the back were asking, what is that? And I said, well, prosumager is a prosumer who has storage. Okay, but it's interesting. And now I'm almost finished with this one, and I'm going to talk mostly about these 2 books, about the concepts and the insights that I learned. And I was happy that a number of people talked about behind the meter, because when I started talking about behind the meter, people were saying, what is behind the meter, and why are you interested in behind the meter? And I think the simple answer is there's a lot of stuff behind the meter. In fact, you can argue that everything we do in this industry is really to serve the gadgets that produce services which sit behind the meter. So when you go to electricity conferences, people are talking about generation and distribution and transmission and all that, and nobody's talking about what do people do when they get the juice delivered to their premises. So behind the meter, I think, is just the most exciting and unexplored area. It's like Columbus arriving in a new world, and nothing has been discovered, nothing is known about this new world. So behind the meter, I think, is very exciting. That's why I decided to focus on that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but this bit of background, I think, might be helpful. So 3 topics, because we have limited time, otherwise I'll be here all day or all night. The first is customer or consumer stratification, which is a fancy word of saying consumers are not the way, as we move in the future, they're going to look different than the traditional consumer. And to explain this, I have to go back to 1980s. I used to work for Southern California Edison. So the blue portion of the map, this is California. We have 3 large investor-owned utilities, which are the 3 colors you see. I now reside in Northern California, so I'm in the red zone. I used to be in the blue zone. And in those days, those companies, the 2 big ones in particular, they were the kings. They owned every customer that lived in that territory. If you didn't want to buy electricity from Southern California Edison, you had no options. Back in the 1980s, you had to go back to the dark ages, because that was the only company that provided service. And you had to buy it from them and pay the rates that the regulator of the state of California said was the proper number. That was it. No arguments. They owned generation in those days. They owned transmission, all of the distribution lines. They owned the meters. They produced the bill. They collected the money. They kind of ran the state on the energy space. So this was the way they looked at the world. All these things are interconnected. Power flows one way, and you pay for all of it. It's like a buffet lunch. You can't go to a buffet lunch and say, I don't like chicken. It's included. You don't have to eat the chicken, but you pay the same amount. So this is very important, because I will show you, as the future unfolds, people are going to use services for parts of what you see in this picture, not all of it. And therefore, they're not going to pay for all of it, and rightly so. So one of the big questions, and I know we have some regulators in the room, is moving in this future, who's going to pay for which portion of this long value chain? So people might say, well, what choices do people have? Well, if you go to that same map of California that I showed you, people can do all of those things. They can produce their own. They can reduce how much they use, because everything is so much more efficient. And they can do more exciting things. They can store. James showed us one of the potential growth of batteries and behind-the-meter small scale as well as large scale storage, but in the next phase, they'll begin to be able to trade and share their excess generation, for example. And then I think in the next few years, certainly in California, certainly in parts of Europe, certainly in Australia, there are going to be third parties, aggregators, or whatever you want to call them. There will be people that come and aggregate individual loads, distributed generation, distributed storage, and consumption, aggregate lots of these small ones into very large blocks of loads and generation and storage, and then manage that and actually make money out of it. And I think there are companies that are trying to do that today. I'm not sure who will succeed, but I think some of these companies will succeed. So these are like Google's when Google was young and nobody knew that it was going to get so big, or Amazon when it started just selling ships or books, and now it's doing everything. So for example, these are photos. Walking around my house, near where I live, every third or fourth house looks like that. We have about 1 million of these in California. In Australia, which is a country of 25 million people, they have 2 million. Germany has 1.7 million, and on. I can give you the numbers. So distributed generation, ladies and gentlemen, is here. And of course, when people put lots of panels, as you see in this photo, they produce more than they consume. So, and companies do this all over the world. This is an Amazon distribution network. So it makes sense. James was showing us that centralized plants are so much cheaper. I think you were talking about that, or maybe it was the other speaker. Yes, but producing power on the roof when you have a big flat roof makes a lot of sense. You don't need a distribution network. You produce power on a sunny day, of which we have many in California. Anyway, when people do this, whether it's big customer or small residential customer, you get a profile sort of like that. So when the sun comes up, you produce more power than you need. So you are a net producer. You become a prosumer by definition. So that blue part, which is excess generation, excess of consumption, becomes an issue. It becomes an issue because somebody has to decide how much that blue portion is worth. In California, up until recently, every kilowatt hour that you produced in excess of what you were using, you could sell back to the network, whether the company wanted it or not. They had to buy it from you and give you a credit equal to the full retail tariff. Net energy metering, you've heard about this. In some countries, it's even more generous, or used to be more generous. So if that's what you do, lots of people are going to put solar panels. And they're going to oversize them because that blue portion becomes a moneymaker. Not only do you cut down how many kilowatt hours you buy, for which you have to pay, but you can actually sell the kilowatt hours and get paid quite a bit. However, if regulators say, no, that is, there's a lot of solar energy in the middle of the day and it's worthless, I'm not going to pay you for it, or pay you very little. In Australia, they changed the rules. They went from full retail to wholesale generation price only. So instead of paying, 30 cents a kilowatt hour, you get paid 7 cents a kilowatt hour today. So what did people do? They add storage. They say, okay, you're not going to pay me for my excess solar generation in the middle of the day? No problem. I'll put one of these in the garage or somewhere. I'll store the excess generation. I'll use it at night when the sun goes down. So it's a difficult issue for regulators and the incumbent utilities to deal with because storage is now, as James pointed out, the price of storage is coming down very rapidly. But there's a lot of other things that is promoting people to do their own thing. In California, as I mentioned, is a crazy place. This is a photo of Berkeley, and you see San Francisco in the background on the other side of the bay. The city council in Berkeley, which is a radical sort of a place, it's home of the University of California, Berkeley, so a lot of radical people with strange ideas. So they voted recently that starting next year, which is only a few months away, anybody building a new residential building in Berkeley would get no natural gas hookup. So they are forcing all new homes to be all electric because natural gas emits carbon. It's a fossil fuel. So in, this small city of whatever number of people live there said, we don't want to contribute to climate change, so we're going to ban natural gas hookups. This is a mayor of a city north of Los Angeles. The city is called Lancaster, and this is the mayor. And back in 2-3 years ago, this city passed a new ordinance that if you want to build a residential house within the city limit, for every square foot, you have to have 2 watts of solar panels. So, no ifs and buts. This is the rule. And many more cities, by the way, are doing all kinds of interesting things. So this is beginning to become, so if you live in that city, you pretty much have to, you will be a solar house when you build a new one. And then there are other interesting, surprising things that happens. You know, we've had wildfires in California. And the company that serves me, PG&E, is in bankruptcy because lawsuits stemming from the wildfires, they have lawsuits more than $30 billion. The company's assets are like $18 billion. So the company is in bankruptcy protection. And last month, I don't know you heard, was it last month or this month? This month, actually. There was predictions of a very hot, windy day, and they said we're going to shut off about 800,000 customers because we don't want our distribution system to ignite any new fires for which we will get sued. So guess what? People lost power for a day or 2 or 3. And so contractors in California cannot keep up with demand. People are putting batteries in their garages, not so much because of economics or how much they get paid for it or not paid for it. When the utility tells you that I can shut you off with short notice, and it might be a day or 2, not just 1 or 2 hours, people freak out and put solar plus storage in many cases. So there are a lot of drivers in play, but the bottom line is if you go to that map that I showed you, there's at least 1 million customers who now have solar, and many of whom would probably also choose to add storage to their system. So customers are moving away from the traditional total dependence on the network. This is a very significant trend. The second trend, which is kind of ties into the first, is that technology is now offering customers to essentially produce, store, and use energy without being connected to the network. Wow. This is a bus stop in the city of Zaragoza in Spain, north of Madrid. So it looks like a regular bus stop, right? It has a little cover, schedule of the bus, and a few seats. Okay, what's big deal about this? Well, the roof is covered with solar panels. You don't need to know that, right? And the seats, behind the seats is a storage device. There's a battery in there. Those ladies are sitting on a storage device. So this unit produces power, stores it, so when the sun goes down, the lights come on and life goes on. And this can or cannot be, or can be disconnected from the network. And examples of this are happening everywhere. This, how do I go back? Oh, here I go. This is in a park near where I lived. I was walking one day and guys came and put this light pole in the middle of nowhere in the park. And I said, are you connecting this to the network? They said, no, this is standalone. And I looked at it. You see the top of the pole is black, right? It's got solar panels built into the pole. It's got a light. It's got storage in the middle. You don't need to know any of that. But if you go to the park at night, it's been a sunny day, the light is on. If it's not a sunny day, then probably no light. That's okay. People don't walk in the middle of the night in the park expecting to get light, right? So it's an okay. Again, in my city, the city came and took all the meters away, the old ones with the coins, and put these in. And they have a little solar gadget on the top. They have a little battery inside. You can use it produces enough power that you can charge your, pay for the parking with your credit card. Bingo. And by the way, there's an app that tells you which parking slot is open. So if it's Christmas time and you're looking for a parking spot and all spots are taken, you can figure out if there's any spots anywhere near where you want to go. Saves you a little time. I was in Oxford recently. I noticed all these old boats that used to go up and down the canals. Most of them now have solar panels, and I talked to a few people, they now have storage. So these are examples of devices where, because people move around, there's no way to really realistically connect them to the network. And don't be surprised, you don't see any electric cars in Sao Paulo. I haven't seen any, but these cars are coming next. So people are building solar panels in the frame of the car, and you can charge the car as you're driving it. This is a free solar charging station in San Francisco. There's the bridge in the background, and there's a little sign that says, if the sun is out, you can charge for free. If the sun is not out, you got to go somewhere, pay for it. So this may become, this may be the gas station of the future. You're driving, you stop, you run out of juice, you juice up at some point. But, technology, and I think people talked about this. This is a company called View, and they recently came up with a smart window, which, among other things, has an IP address. So every window in that building has an IP address. So you can turn off the light or the heat or both on, let's say, in the morning on one side of the building. You don't need to put shades, which are who needs shades if you can adjust the light coming in the house? And by the way, if somebody breaks the window, so you think about this, if you are a retail company and the window calls the police, calls 911, says somebody just broke me. So that's another interesting feature. So Internet of Things is beginning to take place, whether we like it or not. And of course, as I showed you on that chart, there's part of the world where there's no network and no government and no institutions. You're on your own, man. So if you want power, you might lease one of these devices. So you're a non-sumer, I call them, because you're not consumer or prosumer, or you're a non-sumer. You're not connected to the network. Anyway, regulation I mentioned earlier. In the state of California, the California Energy Commission that puts the regulation on standards and buildings and appliances just recently passed. This was proposal some years ago, but starting 2020, all new buildings, residential buildings, have to meet this code. So the state is forcing people to adhere to the standard, which is very interesting. But some people are doing it because they can. This is a friend of mine. His name is Ben Schlesinger. You can go to his website. He lives in Maryland, not far probably from where you live. He lives in St. Michael on the lake. Do you know where that is?
5 minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes. You go pay him a visit. So the house from outside looks large. It's on the lake. But when he was building it, he hired a contractor to come and dig deep holes. So he has ground source heat pump. He can get heat from the ground on the coldest day of the year, where the ground is covered with 3 feet of snow. And he has 2 Teslas so far and 3 Powerwalls in his garage. And most of the time, that's what his load profile looks like. He uses little, he produces a lot. So he's a prosumer big time. And he pays very little. I think the gentleman, the professor earlier was talking about this. The problem with the volumetric tariffs that we have were designed when I showed you that map of Southern California Edison in the 1980s. The assumption was everybody would use lots of kilowatt hours, all of which you bought at a regulated bundled tariff. So there was no problem. But in the future, as there are more people like Ben, they're not going to buy any kilowatt hours. So if you're going to charge them on kilowatt hour basis, their bill will be zero or negative. It's not going to work. And there are a lot of companies, this is Tesla's vision of the future, that everybody would be like Ben. You cover your entire roof with solar panels that look like regular tiles, and you have Tesla and maybe a power wall in the garage. Bingo. Who needs distribution? Who needs utility? Whatever. So I think that is also an interesting development. May sound a bit futuristic, perhaps, but certainly is happening in parts of the world. So let's now talk about putting these two things together and giving it a little extra push. Where is that going to get us? That's going to get us to the third point, which is if you have a number of people who are now, if consumers have now become prosumers, and maybe some of them have become prosumagers and they have electric vehicles and so forth, wow, maybe we can put the loads together and manage that portfolio in ways that couldn't be done. In fact, a small version of that is already happening. If you have a solar panel like shown here, and you can certainly charge your own electric vehicle, right? There's no legal barrier to that. But what if you sold the excess solar to a neighbor? What if you sold it to somebody who's not a neighbor, somebody who drove out from the other side of town? In California, there's an app that actually tells you who within the Bay Area has private charging stations on their, either in their garage or in the driveway. And frankly, regulators don't know what to do with this thing, because it's like selling lemonade. If you're selling lemonade on the driveway, it's not regulated, right? You can charge $2 a cup if you want, and if somebody's buying it, that's fine. So people that do this say, this is my private house, this is my private driveway, I can put a charging on the wall, and if a neighbor wants to charge, retail price may be 28 cents a kilowatt hour, but I want to sell my excess solar at 10 cents a kilowatt hour, or whatever. Or maybe we negotiate. Or maybe it's not a sunny day, you drive with a full electric vehicle, fully charged, and maybe you sell me some of your excess juice from your battery. So peer-to-peer trading that several people mentioned is not that science fiction and futuristic. This is beginning to happen, and regulators have to catch up with the technology very quickly. The other thing which I mentioned is sharing. If you live in a resort like this, or you operate one, this happens to be in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico had a major storm, lost power, parts of the island still don't have good electricity. So this resort actually decided to put in a microgrid, not because they were trying to push the envelope or anything like that. It was just necessity. If somebody is paying $500 a night or more to come and spend the honeymoon on one of those units and power goes out, guess what? They're going to be very unhappy. And technology, people came in with bids. The cost of power from the local utility was 22 cents a kilowatt hour. So this resort puts out an ad and says, can you produce power that is more reliable than what the network was giving us and not exceed 22 cents a kilowatt hour? And guess how many people were willing to do that? 22 cents a kilowatt hour is not bad. You can easily do that and provide much higher quality service and much higher reliability, not having anything to do with the network and not paying for it, by the way. So these things are on the verge of being real and being widely accepted. And the next thing I think several people mentioned, I think Richard mentioned, platforms and so forth. Platforms are very powerful. We don't have very many in the electricity business, but platforms essentially are profitable and powerful because they bring buyers and sellers together, just as they do in a Hong Kong street market. And powerful because they can be very high margin. When electricity retailing in markets that are competitive, retailing business is extremely low margin. But people that have good presence on platform sometimes have margins of 25 to 30%. For example, flower delivery businesses typically have margins 25 to 30%. So the company that collects the money and gets the address of your mother so that the bouquet of flowers can be delivered to her door on Mother's Day, if you pay $100 for that bouquet, something like $25 goes to the platform operator for doing virtually nothing, you might say. But of course, it's providing very important service because it's bringing the person who grows the flowers, the people that ship the flowers, the lady or gentleman who arranges the flowers, plus the person that delivers the flowers. All of that has to be done on Mother's Day if you want your mom to be happy. And that's a very important service for which you're willing to pay a premium. So electricity, right now we don't have very many examples except for maybe a few. This is a company based in London called Piccolo, and they provide a platform for trading flexibility on the distribution network. I don't have a lot of time to get into details, but distribution networks, particularly with the kind of developments that I mentioned, they get stressed. We have in the US, we have these neighborhoods that are called super zip codes. These are high income, big homes. They typically have PVs and EVs. So depending on when they're charging and when they're producing power, they can overwhelm the distribution network. So a company like PG&E or its equivalent in London could say, I have congestion on this part of the network tomorrow from 2 to 4. Who can relieve congestion on that part of the network during those 2 hours? So this is what this one company does. It brings the buyers and sellers for a particular product, which in this case is flexibility services. And by the way, to do this, if you go through the details, there's like 9 steps, all of which are very labor intensive and take a lot of time. And this company is trying to actually make this very easy. So you just do a few clicks and it's done. And it's paperless and it's relatively easy to do. So lots of people are trying to figure out if there are more examples or more opportunities to offer a platform where buyers and sellers can trade products or services. And of course, people talked about virtual power plants. My favorite company is a German company. They're based in Cologne. It's called Next Kraftwerke. This company has, I think it has more than 5 gigawatts of capacity under control. And if you visit their company, they have nothing. They're just 5 people sitting in front of screens. But they manage over 5 gigawatts. How many people in this room? I know there's some big generator. How many people have 5 gigawatts of capacity in this room? Nobody? Anyway, that's a big number. So virtual power plants, or whatever you want to call them, is the next big thing. There are some companies that are active in this, and we can add ENGIE and some others who are active in Latin America. These happen to be some that I'm familiar with. But 5 years from now, if I get invited to come back to one of your conferences, maybe I'll tell you how many new companies are doing this. So to wrap up, I think we talked about all of this is happening today. This alters the relationships. I know some of you are in generation or distribution or retailing business here. And so depending on how your customers are going to migrate from that traditional wholesale bundle service, your relationship with them and their relationship to you is going to be very different. Now, we saw lots of slides from Bloomberg. This one was a Bloomberg in Australia that I visited at a conference, and they claimed, I don't know, your numbers look a little different, but they said that in Australia, something like 40% of the capacity would be behind the meter within a few years. Maybe the numbers are different, but Australia is a very strange place. So you might say, well, okay, this is all big talk, and this guy from Silicon Valley must have been smoking something, but it's happening. California Energy Commission puts out a forecast, and one of the recent forecasts said, it's actually very interesting, I've never seen this before. They have a forecast for sales, and they have a forecast for consumption. How many kilowatt hours do people use, and how many of those do they buy? The rest they produced. And the difference, according to this estimate, is 50 gigawatt hours by 2030. So people use 50 gigawatt hours that they produced, which they no longer bought. I think those numbers are going to grow in many parts of the world. So you're going to see projections forecast sales and consumption. And consumption may continue to grow, but the sales from the distribution company may not. So I think that's interesting. Okay, so to kind of wrap it up for you, I think what I think is going to happen, this is what I call the customer-consumer stratification. As time goes on, depending on where you are, depending on the retail tariffs, depending on whether you have net energy metering or not, depending on lots of other things, but most important really depends on the regulation, whether it allows people to move away from the traditional service model or not. Some people will stay in the bottom. The bottom is bundled regulated tariff, and you buy all the kilowatt hours from the network. But as I have explained, people can move away from that, and perhaps some people at the tip of the pyramid would continue to disconnect or use the network very sparingly, and we have to figure out what to do with these customers. And what we have to do with these customers is first to understand who they are and what they do. So the definitions are kind of listed: consumer, prosumer, prosumager, and the more exotic kinds, which are much more interesting to look at, for which I probably need another hour to discuss. But the critical part for regulation, I think, is to sort out this value chain for which everybody paid and everybody used. In the future, depending on where you are in that pyramid, you're going to use only part of that network, and you're going to say, I'm not going to pay for generation because, I have my own solar panels, or I'm not going to pay for transmission because I have storage, and so forth and so on. This is actually beginning to happen. There was an experiment in Switzerland recently where there was a local community that essentially produced, stored, and consumed power within a local distribution network. So they send a letter to the regulator saying, dear regulator, we're not using the upstream of that infrastructure. Why should we pay for it? And the regulator is saying, oh my God, I didn't know this was going to happen. I'd like to retire because I don't know how to deal with this issue. So, future, depending on who you are and where you are, it might look sort of like that, or it might look like that. I sent this to my personal assistant to produce this, and she changed some of the flows a little bit, actually made it more interesting. So it came back, and I said, oh, maybe she changed the flows the wrong way, but then I said, that makes sense too. So anyway, that may be the future. It's much more complicated. Electrons are not going to flow one way. Not all customers are going to look alike. In United Kingdom, the regulator is now considering to allow a single customer to buy service from multiple suppliers. In most countries, you cannot do that. You buy from one or you don't buy anything. Now, why would you do that? Let's say you have an electric car which uses a lot of juice. So maybe you leased your car from Tesla or some company, and they say, we'll lease your car for 2 years, and you can charge from our electrons at time that we tell you to charge. And for that, you pay this monthly fee. That makes perfect sense, doesn't it? And you use the same utility for everything else, for example. But the future is very exciting. I think these opportunities are not that unrealistic. So, to finish, I think just maybe a few words. I'm always asked, what should I do? This is maybe a utility somewhere. And the options are, there are many options. It's not good for everybody, and it's not necessarily the same thing. But you can be a gentailer, which is be in the generation and retail, or you can be any of those, or you can be something different than that. And those are options that people have, and I think we need to think about that. And perhaps for you who are in this business, think about which one of those is a better option for you. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions if you have. Thank you.
Nós agradecemos e abrimos nesse momento para aquelas tradicionais perguntas. O Eduardo já está aqui com algumas, então vou pedir que venha ao palco e aqueles que tiverem vontade de fazê-las, entregue para as recepcionistas após terem escritos nesta ficha que está na pasta de vocês.
Thank you, Mr. Susanshi. I'll go back to Portuguese.
Okay.
So I don't know which...
I can listen.
Can you get the
listen,
device?
sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You ready to go?
Yeah.
Yeah? Bom, o que está batendo aqui no meu WhatsApp, como sempre, o pessoal está bastante filosófico hoje, né? Então, até fez aqui uma analogia com a filosofia predominante da parte da manhã. Na parte da manhã, quando a gente olha para a camada mais superior nos termos filosóficos, a gente disputou de um extremo uma coisa mais centralizada, o planejador onisciente, onipotente, e, de outro lado, o mercado tomando as melhores decisões. Transferindo esse tipo de analogia filosófica, Mr. Susanshi, a pergunta agora tem que ver com how paternalistic, o quão paternalista você pode ser em relação ao papel do consumidor. O corolário por trás dessa pergunta tem que ver com o reconhecimento de que o consumidor tem informações limitadas e, num ambiente regulatório, pelo menos como o do Brasil, é muito difícil entender o que é energia nos seus aspectos físicos e, principalmente, como é que isso se manifesta em termos tarifários. Eu garanto para o senhor aqui que deve ter dezenas de consultores que dedicam 24 horas do dia para entender tarifa, né? Nós temos departamentos de empresas que só fazem isso o tempo inteiro. Então, diante dessas limitações, tanto do ponto de vista de informação, quanto do ponto de vista dos papéis ao longo da cadeia de valor, muito segregada, muito fragmentada, o senhor acredita que há um limite para a delegação da tomada de decisão desse consumidor? Ou seja, eu preciso ajudar o consumidor a tomar certas decisões? E aí tem uma segunda parte, mas acho que é melhor o senhor responder essa primeiro.
Okay, very good question. I'm often asked this, and I think all the research on consumer behavior suggests exactly what you said, that consumers have limited capability and limited time, and frankly, limited interest. Electricity is not exciting.
No.
You know, I don't know of very many people that tell their wife or spouse, you know, honey, wear something nice, we're going to go shop for electricity tonight. No, it just doesn't happen, right? Ken, do you ever do that with your? Yeah. You know, it's not an exciting product. And it's hard to understand. People don't know the difference between kilowatt and kilowatt hour and so forth, which makes the role of the aggregator far more important and interesting. Because here's somebody who comes and says, you know, sign on this dotted line. I will make sure that your bill will be either lower, certainly not higher than what you pay today, and you don't have to do anything. Allow me to monitor your usage, allow me to optimize when and if you charge your electric vehicle and so forth and so on. Mm-hmm. And that makes the aggregation, which I mentioned briefly, very powerful. I think that is one of the things that I don't know how many people in this room are interested in that, but that, you know, if I was a young person going to start a new career, that's what I would do. I would really focus on doing exactly what you say, because consumers, the average consumer is hopeless. So we have to automate it, make it easy for them to gain some benefits without necessarily doing a lot of hard work.
Okay.
I hope that answers the question.
Tem a follow-up question to that one. Se você admite, então, que há uma necessidade de prover para o consumidor a melhor qualidade de informação, quem deve ser o líder neste papel de nudge the consumer? Levá-lo sempre na melhor direção. É o regulador? É a distribuidora? Ou é o mercado? É a inteligência distribuída no mercado? Estou tipificando 3 grandes papéis aqui, né? É o regulador, ou seja, mais regulação na ausência de sinais eficientes de mercado, especificamente para alguns nichos, ou é a distribuidora, que de cara teria muitas vantagens por conhecer a rede, tanto do ponto de vista físico como do mercado agregado. Falando de estratificação, ela conhece toda a sua área de concessão. Ou eu simplesmente acredito no mercado e aposto todas as minhas fichas na competição para que eles, então, ganhem no momento em que provém a melhor informação para o consumidor.
Okay, thank you. Another good question. A little bit ahead of, you know, I tried to think ahead, but this is even ahead of how far I can think. I think, you know, regulation in this space, I think, will probably be very difficult. And so market forces, I think, will probably prevail in the long run. So again, we have to make sure that it's not, you know, it's a level playing field. People are not, people on top of the, you know, people who move away from the bottom of the pyramid are not imposing extra cost on people who want to stay on the bottom of the pyramid. That's in California, where I talk to the regulators, that is their number one issue, because, you know, as I said, a million people are essentially not paying their fair share. The there was another thought that I kind of lost it, but
Could it be about the distribution company role?
distribution companies?
Role. Their role, their function on this, no?
At my age, a lot of thoughts come and go, and I cannot retrieve them, but maybe it'll come to me later. I think, to go back to the point, the average consumer has limited capability to handle existing deals. People let's say in Australian market, there was a study that showed the average consumer in a market that is very competitive is usually picking a choice which leaves him or her somewhere between $200 to $300 away from the optimal choice. In other words, even in a competitive market, when they have choices, people do not pick the best option.
Okay.
Either because they don't know or they can't figure it out. It's complicated, right? We know that. So now we're moving to a future where choices are far more complicated. Prices will become probably more complicated. Finding the optimal solution will be more complicated. So that much I know. Now, who is going to regulate that market or whether we need to regulate it? I don't think so. I think we probably ought to allow smart aggregators to move into this market and actually do that, provide that service.
Okay. We're running a little bit out of time. Uma pergunta bem direta agora. Nos casos em que o senhor estudou ao redor do mundo, o senhor viu casos onde sobreinvestimento se tornou um problema que, inclusive, depois teve que ser pago pelos consumidores? Ou seja, é excesso de incentivos ou incentivos distorcidos levando a overcapacity, overinvestment?
Actually, thank you. My thought actually came back to me, which
All
is
right.
good, as I was listening to your...
We're working.
Nobody really knows the answer. People, in any country, you can say how much has industry invested in upstream of the meter. You can add up the investment in generation and everything else, add up the number. And it's a big number, right? Billions of dollars. Very people have studied how much consumers have spent on devices behind the meter, particularly now that they're buying and installing solar panels. In California, a typical one would be $40,000 or more. A Tesla would easily be $100,000. So that friend of mine that I showed you, he has 2 Teslas and 3 Powerwalls and so forth. He probably has $500,000 or more in behind-the-meter investment. And the average consumer uses these devices very poorly and very infrequently, whether it's the electric car or the dishwasher or anything. Think about it. Most of us have all these devices that sit idle most of the time. So there's an opportunity for someone to come and make better sense and better use and optimize what's behind the meter. So maybe that answers part of your question. I think there is, but whether we overinvest, I think that's a good question. I think in California, when we had these extremely generous net energy metering laws, people, as I showed you on the one slide, they wouldn't put like 6 panels or 8 panels to reduce their consumption. They were putting it to make money because they knew that selling the excess kilowatt hours would reduce their bill not to zero, but they actually get a check from the utility at the end of the month. So many people, you can argue, have overinvested. So that becomes an issue too. I haven't given it a lot of thought. But if you're a regulator, those are issues you need to think about, because this network is for the benefit of the entire society. We don't want the small group of people to overinvest and not fully pay for the cost that they impose on the network. So the guy that I showed you, even though he has all this investment, if there's 2 weeks of cold weather and no sunshine, his battery will go dry, he can't charge his cars, and the ground source heat pump probably will not produce enough heat to keep his house warm. So every now and then, not very often, he has to go back and rely on the network. In the meantime, because of the volumetric tariffs, he hasn't paid for that network. So maybe every 2 years, for 2 weeks, he has to go back to the network for which he hasn't paid anything. So these become very, very difficult issues. I don't have all the answers, but it's a very good question.
This will be our last question. Talking about going back to the network, as pessoas estão em busca aqui de global benchmarks. Então, o senhor disse que a Austrália é um país estranho. O Brasil também é um país estranho, né? Então, usando as comparações que foram feitas com a Califórnia, se a gente pegar 2 indicadores bem simples, né? A Califórnia tem 40 milhões de pessoas e o GDP per capita, $35 mil por ano. Brasil, 210 milhões, 1/3 da renda per capita, PPP, Power Purchase Parity, tudo em income. Quais são as lições que o senhor acha que a gente já deveria aproveitar, principalmente agora, num momento onde estamos entrando num período de contribuições de uma audiência pública, public hearing? O nosso regulador, inclusive, está ali, indo fazer uma pausa, está diante do dilema de descobrir ou não se há um subsídio cruzado entre classes de consumidores por causa da inserção de IGD. Então, é um dilema que já está diante da gente. Há lições globais que poderiam ser importadas para o Brasil? E essa é a nossa última pergunta, né?
Another good question. Yes, definitely. I think we can learn from each other. In California, to give you a rough number, there's a professor at UC Berkeley did a study. Every non-solar customers pays an extra $65 a year to subsidize solar customers.
There you go.
Now, I'm not a solar customer because my roof is too small. I'm happy to pay that $65. I'm subsidizing lots of other people who are a lot less deserving. So it doesn't bother me. $65 is
For you.
a dinner, a bottle of wine. I can afford it. But from a social point of view, you can say that's not a good subsidy, and it's going, typically in California, it goes from the poor to the rich, you can say. So it's a subsidy sort of going in the wrong direction. Usually you want the rich to subsidize the poor, not the other way around. So these are important issues, and I think Germany had very generous feed-in tariffs. Maybe they overdid it, they're phasing them out. Australia had extremely generous net energy metering laws, which they have reduced substantially. So Brazil should learn from these and sort of start with the right numbers. Maybe people only get paid the generation cost. And as people showed on the chart, in the middle of the day when there's a lot of sunshine, the value of solar could be zero. So you could say, I'm not going to pay anything on a sunny day from 10 to 6, I'm not going to pay anything. But that would encourage people to put in storage. So you got to be careful. There's a lot of unintended consequences. Regardless of what you do, there's always hard to guess what people are going to do when you make a decision.
Mr. Tiosanchi, we're running out of time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Obrigado. Obrigado, Eduardo. Obrigado pela apresentação. Informamos que teremos agora uma pausa para o COF, e essa pausa será de 20 minutos, portanto, retornaremos às 3h50. Eu quero informá-los que durante o COF acontecerá o lançamento do livro Reflexões sobre uma arquitetura de mercado para o setor elétrico brasileiro, este que está na tela. É fruto de um projeto de pesquisa e desenvolvimento regulado pela ANEEL, desenvolvido e coordenado pelo Instituto Ascende Brasil, ao longo de 36 meses, que envolveu 10 pesquisadores de várias universidades e instituições brasileiras, com o apoio da EDF Norte Fluminense e EDP e Energisa. Então, portanto, agora no COF será o lançamento Reflexões sobre uma arquitetura de mercado para o setor elétrico brasileiro. Retornamos às 15h50.